Our sacred republic is in danger of total collapse. If we don't win this next election, our country is finished. We have to return to the Constitution and to the wisdom of the founding fathers. And we are proud, very proud, of our Judeo-Christian heritage. Have you heard quotes like this before? I certainly have. And similar quotes. So, a lot of people, a lot of decent people in America are asking themselves, what went wrong? How is it possible that we are where we are now in 2024 in complete madness? How is it possible? And I ask very seriously, how is it possible? How is it possible that mad scientists are able to legally chemically castrate little boys? How is it possible that mad scientists are allowed to take a 13-year-old girl and cut off her breasts? How is it that we are in this condition today? That's the big question. And a lot of people, again, a lot of just sort of normal people, they'll say, we have to win elections. Because if we win elections, then we can turn it back. Because most people in the country don't really support this insane stuff. So if we win the elections, then we'll be able to turn the dial back and go back to sanity. Go back to the good old America, right? And so they focus on elections. Just as a parenthesis, I'm a little bit wary of that because when it came to things like abortion in the last few years, taking it to the people didn't work out so greatly, and it's very sad. It's very evil. Even in supposedly red states like Ohio and Kansas, the babies lost big time. Kind of makes you wonder if a lot of red Americans, conservative Americans, are conservative insofar as it helps themselves. I kind of wonder that when I look at the abortion results. But granted, I'm going to say this, and I want to make sure it's very clear. Elections are important. They're not nothing. So even in, imperfect systems, we have imperfect systems around the world. Elections still do matter. Okay, so if you can stem the tide of insanity, and you can elect people who will probably pass laws that either partially or entirely conform to the natural law and to God's law, then phenomenal. 100% for it. It's a basic duty as a citizen of a country. So I'm all in favor of, in the upcoming elections, to figure out who would be the best person in this or that capacity, in this or that elected office, and to cast your vote if you think that it will actually potentially make a real difference. And just to give a very concrete example, if you have two candidates, one of whom, if he got a federal abortion law requiring all states to allow abortion, if that law went to the desk of a president and two candidates are there, one of them would sign it and the other would veto it based on everything that you can judge on them, I think that alone, everything else equal, I think that alone should would be a good reason to vote for one or the other, and obviously for the one who would not sign that law. But no matter what elections there are, even if you get pretty good election results, it's not going to solve the fundamental problem. Sorry. But it's not. Sadly, it will not solve the fundamental problem. Fundamentally, it's not going to fix it. So the question is, why? Is there some fundamental problem in our system? Is there a fundamental grave error such that if that remains untouched and unremedied, things will almost certainly just get worse and worse and worse? Does that exist? That's the question. And the whole theme of this video is that there is such a fundamental error in our system. There's a lot of good stuff in our system. There is. There are certain things that we have in America that conform to the natural law. That's gradually being eroded, but even today there are things that correspond, at least to a large extent, to the natural law. That is true. But as long as this fundamental error remains, we cannot solve the problem. And so what is that problem? Well, to entice you to keep watching the video, I'm going to forestall that answer for the moment, and I'm going to give it to you. In fact, I'm going to help you to come to it in case you don't know what it is. So I want to give you a few quotations. We're going to go overseas to 2 countries, and we're going to quote from their constitutions. And what do they say? So we're going to the country of President Orban, which would be Hungary. And so I'm going to read to you just a couple of snippets from the preamble to the Hungarian Constitution as it stands today in the year of our Lord 2024. Preamble. God bless the Hungarians. Okay, sounds pretty good so far. I'm skipping over something. We are proud that our King Saint Stephen built the Hungarian state on solid ground and made our country a part of Christian Europe 1,000 years ago. That's the very first proclamation that is made in the Constitution. And as we go a little bit further down, we see, we recognize the role of Christianity in preserving nationhood. Unfortunately, in the very next sentence, we value the various religious traditions of our country. So obviously that's not ideal. Okay, in fact, that's it's probably not explicit. It's not explicitly heretical, but it's down that rabbit hole of religious indifference, right? But regardless, the fact that a country today in its constitution has something like that, basically starting it off, that's encouraging, you know? And perhaps that has something to do with the fact that Hungary is one of the few countries today that is really, in Europe, really pushing back against the gender insanity and the marriage insanity. So that's Hungary. And the next one I want to show you is briefly Ireland. Constitution of Ireland. This is apparently as of 2019. I don't think it's been changed. So this is what it says. Let's see. Constitution of Ireland. In the name of the Most Holy Trinity. Breath of fresh air. From whom is all authority, and to whom, as our final end, all actions both of men and states must be referred. We, the people of, I don't quite know how to pronounce, Eire of Ireland, right? Humbly acknowledging all our obligations to our divine Lord Jesus Christ, who sustained our fathers through centuries of trial, etc., etc. Beautiful. The Hungarian constitution mentions God right away and explicitly recognizes Christianity and explicitly mentions Saint Stephen, Catholic king. The Irish constitution, even better. It invokes the most holy Trinity. It invokes Jesus Christ, and it seems to attribute to him the good that Ireland enjoyed as a result of Jesus Christ. So it's little wonder that even today, even though Ireland has legalized abortion, I think to some extent, nevertheless, they are still way further back, it seems, in the path towards insanity than the rest of Europe. And Hungary, as well, is pushing back against these things. So it seems that invoking God and Christianity and Jesus Christ and the Trinity, it seems that that kind of might be helpful for your country to not fall into the abyss. Makes sense, right? So, going back to our question now. What is the fundamental error in our system? In the system of this country that I love and that I would love to see go down a good path. What is the fundamental error? I think you might already know. It is the complete, full, 100% omission of God in our Constitution. And even worse, the omission of Jesus Christ, of the Holy Trinity, and super important, the omission of stating that all laws of this nation must correspond, must obey the law of God, must conform to the Ten Commandments, must conform to the law of the gospel given by Jesus Christ, passed on by his apostles, and ultimately to the laws of his church. Our Constitution doesn't even mention a general God. He's completely absent. Do we think about that? I think that even for traditional Catholics, sometimes it can be hard for us to see that because we are so, in this country, we are so entangled in Americanism. We're so entangled in liberty and freedom, personal freedom. We're so entangled in this that I think that we can easily forget sometimes the bare basic facts in front of us. God is not invited in our Constitution. It's amazing because even today, I saw a recent poll maybe a couple years ago. Apparently, 64% of Americans identify as Christian. So 64% of Americans, roughly, profess to follow Jesus Christ. 50 years ago, it was 90%. So especially 50 years ago, but even today, how is it that in a country where the majority profess Christ, profess Christ, and profess to follow his law, and profess to follow Christianity, how is it that in this country, in a country where the majority profess that, we still have a completely secular constitution? How is it that when 90% of Americans professed to follow Jesus Christ, we still had a completely secular government, completely secular constitution? How is that possible? I think it's simply because we are so blinded by the idea that America is, in its United States form, in its U.S. Constitution form, it's the light shining, the shining beacon on a hill. It's the New Jerusalem. It's the place of freedom, where you can go and do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anybody else. Physically. Spiritually, yeah, not a big deal. And so I think that because we are so entangled in this Americanism, we can't even see the evil of not mentioning Jesus Christ in our Constitution. And it struck me recently when I read how Christ, you cannot be neutral. If you're neutral, you are against Christ. Because he said explicitly, if you're not with me, you're against me. So if you're in the middle, you're not with him. And so if you're in the middle, you're against him. So a constitution that does not mention him, doesn't even mention a generic God, that's evil. This is not to deny that there might be certain things in the Constitution that are good, clever, things that we can use in a Catholic republic. That's not to deny any of that. It's not to deny that there are amendments to the Constitution that we can say are good, or at least mostly good. But that doesn't negate the fact that as a whole, if you omit Christ, it's evil. So, a second point I want to make, and this is going to be the second main point, and then we'll wrap it up. The question is, well, we can say an objection to this would be, well, okay, things are pretty bad now, but things were really good before. How did it work so well before if this was evil? If you go back to 1950, for example, things were pretty good, it would seem. There were plenty of laws that were on the books for states, even for the federal government, that corresponded to the natural law, at least partially. If you go back 100 years, you would see probably even more of the natural law being upheld by the law of the state or of the federal government. And so the question is then, well, how did it work so well before? How did you have all these good laws back in the day with an evil system? Well, here's the idea. You had those good laws because the population still understood and still, to a large extent, adhered to the natural law. you've got a system where you elect people and they make laws. So if the majority of people, even people who are elected, still understand basic natural law, well, then it would make sense that you would have laws, for the most part, that are conforming to the most basic natural law. The most basic natural law. And so I think that's how we can say that there were laws like that back in the day, because the population generally believed it. But what we have to understand is that you have those laws, say in 1950, and you look at some of the laws we have now in 2024, polar opposites on a number of moral issues. And yet, they're under the exact same Constitution. That's the problem. The exact same Constitution that does not mention God or Christ or His law, that needs to govern our laws, that exact same Constitution made it possible for laws against abortion, sodomy, divorce even, and laws doing more or less the opposite. Why? Because we don't have a restraint on the way that we have to act. We don't have the Ten Commandments officially telling us your laws have to be like this. It's because the ultimate law is not God's law. It's that horrible phrase when it's used in the way that it's used nowadays, the will of the people. It's incredible. A couple weeks ago, I saw Trump talking about the abortion laws in different states and saying it's the will of the people. How on earth can we say that whether a state will permit legally murder is simply the will of the people? How can we say that? Well, because that's the system. And as long as the Fifth Commandment, well, really Fifth and Sixth combined, as long as the Fifth Commandment is not set up as one of the laws of the land, then the permission or not to murder someone is going to be the people's vote. And I challenge you to object to this proposition. I don't know if there's anything in the Constitution or even in the amendments to the Constitution that would prevent us from judging that children up to 10 years old may be eliminated. We've already judged in many states, and Roe v. Wade back in the day, that children in the womb are not legally human. And so what prevents us from saying that the ones outside the womb for 10 years are not human either, and so not protected under the 14th Amendment? What is there that prevents us from doing that? Nothing. So, okay. That may have sounded a little bit dark and depressing, but remember, on this channel, we're joyful. We think. We want to stay away as much as we can from the news. We want to ponder these things. And so what is the answer to all this? Well, elections matter. They do. And they don't matter. do I say they don't matter? It's simply this thing that we've been talking about for all this time. The fundamental error has to be resolved before fundamental solutions will come. It is our job to patch everything up as much as we can, and one of the main ways to do that is by voting. But at the end of the day, it's not a bruise. It's a major surgery that needs to be done, and Band-Aids might help a little bit temporarily, but they're not going to solve it. So, by all means, go out and vote. And if there's any of these abortion amendments, go out and vote. That's maybe the most important vote you ever throw out, ever cast in your life. Okay, these direct abortion amendments in these states, you definitely have an obligation to vote. But what is the solution then? Well, ultimately, it's working on our own sanctification. And what are the main ways of doing that? Presence of God, prayer, the sacraments, the rosary, and adoration of Jesus Christ, truly present in the Blessed Sacrament. That's the solution. And so whether you can do all those, or you maybe live in a situation where you can't do all those, you can always have the presence of God, and you can always pray. So be of good cheer. We have a good God. We have a lot of good people in our country. And let us vote, but also let us understand the real problem and the ultimate solution.